of our discussion of what do you call this, of the CRISP DM methodology. I think it was. I don't know if I've lost connection here. I heard a very weird sound there. I don't know what that is. I don't know. So we finalized our discussion of the CRISP DM methodology, and I think the last time we had class, we had a discussion that was centered around just a difference, right? Fundamental difference between data mining and data warehousing. Just so we're not taken aback here when we do have these dedicated discussions, right? So we realize that data mining fundamentally is about discovering patterns, right? And I should have asked. Apologies. I'm assuming you can hear me just fine. Don't know what that is. Can you hear me just fine? Thanks.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
We can hear you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we realize that data mining is about discovering patterns in data and trying to identify sort of relationships that might exist amongst the different attributes associated with the data. Really, fundamentally, it's about derivation of insights, right, from large data sets. And in fact, it's quote unquote tied to, I keep hearing sound here, but it's tied to certain fields here, like statistics, for instance, and databases, right? And the goal really is to turn the raw data into actionable knowledge. And what I decided to do is no, Mr. Prez, I'll ask that you mute. I don't know what that is here. Very strange characters in your group here. By the way, I was sitting there and I started marking, right? And there's some characters that got scripts and decided to walk out of the class. And it's going to be hard to discover who you are here, but you can tell, right? Some of the characters that benefited from whatever it is they thought they were doing. So in I think group number 2, I distributed scripts, and because I ran out of scripts, I asked some of you to move out, and there's some people that actually moved out with scripts, right? And I know I moved out with scripts because what I did in the assessments, this is how you know, right? This is how you know that people have gotten to a stage where even basic thinking is a problem, right? You get a script, and you fail to read and reason and see that the questions were different, right, in subsequent assessments. So I altered them slightly, and you could tell that people are literally providing solutions as though they were answering the very first assessment. Very strange lot. But I'll make it my mission to find you. I will find you, and when I find you, you are coming back next year. That's a promise. But anyway, you're not coming back because of the personal vendetta. You're coming back because I will prove that you're doing the wrong things. You're doing things that are unethical, things that go against the rules and regulations of the University of Zambia. I will find you. I promise you that. But anyways, so there was a discussion centered around.
So thank you.
Is this the case with everybody else? You can't. There's somebody who's saying they can't hear me or something.
I can hear you, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
thanks.
I can hear you, sir.
You want to check your connection here? I'll find you. Usually, when you have a large group like this, they're usually bad elements, right? Just like we have bad elements in society, people that do drugs, people that murder other people, people that steal. They're there, and I know they're there amongst you. But I'm not like the other people that have decided to just pretend like this problem is not there in the department, right? Between now and October, I will find you. I've made it my mission. Thank you very much. Right. So I decided I was going to showcase this whole notion of data mining by just doing a little bit of exploratory data analysis, right? So the graph here showcases 2 different graphs. On the left is what you might call data from your typical data warehouse, right? Just raw facts. And then to the right is some sort of pattern that we've discovered, right? So we are trying to distinguish, students at risk of failing and those that are not at risk of failing. So pay particular attention to the dots that are in blue and in red, for instance. And then we realize that, so it's data mining, we realize that, when there's mention of the so-called data warehouse here, all we're doing is we're making reference to this system that acts as a single source of truth. So it aggregates data from multiple sources, if you remember, right? The key characteristics that we highlighted, it's subject-oriented, it integrates data from different sources, it's time variant, and it's non-volatile, right? You freeze it, in other ways. It's like it's a save point of sorts. So I gave an example to say if we were wanting to come up with a data warehouse for the University of Zambia, right? What we would do is we'd create it in such a way that every month we freeze it. So if we are querying it right now, we'd be querying information from the month of July, right? Because we are in August. And again, what I did was I decided to come up with some kind of variation to showcase how this would manifest, right? And, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I don't know if Professor Piri is going to come in or Dr. Nyirenda here, but I will share my data sets, the data sets I've been using with them. And at some point, they'll probably showcase to you how you can build a data warehouse by using the data coming in from different sources. If you remember our example, a student at risk of failing, which by the way was not used as an example there, but in the assessment. But I mentioned that data comes from different sources, from SIS, from Moodle, right? Could be data coming in from some finance system or something. And what you typically have is, as the raw facts are being extracted from these different sources, there's a couple of processes that you perform, right? They're called ETL processes. So you're extracting and you're transforming data, and then you're loading the data into a data warehouse. Now, what you begin to notice is that these ETL processes will more or less be similar to the things that we discussed, the things or the operations that manifest themselves as part of modify, right? If you remember schema, for instance, or as part of data preparation in the CRISP-PM methodology. Anyway, and then ultimately, so you're loading this data once it's been extracted, transformed, and loaded. Well, once it's been extracted and transformed, you load it into a central data warehouse, single source of truth, and then you can use systems, right? Reporting systems to actually extract information from this data warehouse. So it's a single source of truth, right? Now, just to differentiate some of these, and again, these are going to be discussed in depth, but usually when there's mention of the data warehouse, sometimes people throw in phrases like data lake and data mart, for instance. These are related concepts that are different. So again, the data warehouse is it will typically have this repository of data that typically have structured data which has been processed and validated, right? Remember the ETL process here. The schema is typically defined before the data is loaded because you know what to expect. You know that the data is coming in from these different sort of systems, and you know the structure of the data. And typically it would be used by data analysts and business analysts, right, to extract information. And then your data lake will typically just comprise raw and structured data. In some instances, it would be like semi-structured, so the combination of both structured and unstructured data in its native form, right? And typically, in terms of the schema here, you see that it's not predefined like a data warehouse, but it's applied when the data is read for analysis. It's just like you're doing it after the fact, reading the data from the data lake itself. And typically, this sort of repository of data is accessed by your data scientists, machine learning engineers, people that would understand the different techniques that need to be used to extract data from unstructured, to extract information from unstructured data, in other words. And then your data mart is nothing more than just a subset of the warehouse. So imagine we have a data warehouse for the entire UNZA. There are some people that may be interested in data about students. There are people that would be interested in data about lecturers. There may be people who are interested in data about support staff or data about financial records for UNZA. So a data mart is like a subset of a data warehouse. So it functions more or less like the same way as a data warehouse, but it's a specialized variation of a data warehouse, in other words. And typically you tend to create these data marts because querying from this large repository of data can be slow. I saw this happen in real life, right? When I was working for Airtel in my previous life, we had these huge repositories of data where we would push all the data, like for the entire year, right? Would actually partition these repositories of data by month or by week so that it was a lot easier for us to query from them. At some point, we started segmenting this information in such a way that we would have like a separate repository for prepaid subscribers, for postpaid subscribers, and all those things. Those repositories of data are what we'd be calling data marts, right? Just subsets of a data warehouse, in other words, right? And you create these subsets of data. We create these subsets so that it's more efficient for you to extract data, and it's a lot simpler for you to access specific information, right? If you're a specialized team or something. Now, and more on this, there will be detailed discussions on how you design a data warehouse and the data mart and stuff. But I think what's important as we wrap up this lecture series is this discussion centered around ethical consideration. What you probably have already noticed is that whenever you're dealing with data, many a times you will find yourself accessing very, very sensitive information or very, very sensitive pieces of data. Grades are sensitive from the perspective of UNZA. You agree with me, right? Nobody would want to have a situation where they have their data being shared, right, by Lighton, you have your data being shared by Lighton as part of some test data set or something. Nobody wants to see their zeros laid out there in the open or something, right? So we have got to think about those things. So I'll import pandas as PD or something, and then do a var student database is equal to pd.read CSV so that I showcase what I'm trying to say. If you look at the data set we have, if we had not anonymized this data set, you'd have noticed that there was quite a bit of sensitive data here. Student ID, your name, like information that would easily make your record identifiable, so people would know who you are. Now, this is what one would call a trivial case, right? I mean, so what if somebody sees my records, right? You probably have a thick skin, even if I got a 0 in quiz 1 or quiz 2, who cares, right? But it turns out that in some instances, you have access to highly sensitive data, like financial records. I wouldn't want my financial records to be available for anyone to see out there, right? Because I may become a target. Assuming I had money, a lot of money, I could become a target, right? So thieves may target me. Or, if I'm an aspiring, if I'm a politician like that, I'm aspiring for higher office, I may not want people to gain access to my sensitive medical records, right? Because they can frame me or something like that. And I've seen this happen in real life many a times when I find myself at minor soc or something. The medical scheme allows me to take my parents there. You find these very important people, right, with bodyguards coming in. And whenever they come in, they'll call a specific doctor to come and attend to them. I swear, the other day I saw him, the Minister of Technology and Science. I saw him. Everybody saw him. He was taken into a private room or something like that. I hope he's okay. But the interesting thing about the data, right, there is that not everybody at minor SOCO has access to data or records associated with very, very important people, VVIP. You have like cabinet ministers who, when they're sick, they'll probably be taken to minor SOCO medical center, right, as first line of treatment or something like that, and then it's very serious, they'll be flown out or something. Those records, I'm told, are restricted. So even some doctors at minor SOCO will not have access to those records. And so, in other words, what we're saying here is ethics becomes important when we find ourselves handling data. Okay? And the reason is simple. Data mining, I'm sure you've seen this already, can be quite powerful, right? When you have the means to extract information from raw data, you become a powerful person. You become a very, very powerful person. I remember when I was working for Airtel, some of my friends would, at the time, I've always been level-headed myself. But at the time, my friends thought I had free reign, right? Which I did, I guess. So, you have this girlfriend you suspect is cheating on you or something, and you're like, Lighton, can you extract records for this number and email them or something? I would say no here, because I was given a lecture, or a pep talk by my manager and my supervisor, right? on the importance of ethics, you know. But it was there. There were a number of instances. The example I gave is probably, you know, probably a very trivial one. It sounds funny, but there'll be instances where somebody loses their phone, for instance, right? Oh, I lost my phone and I want to track it. Can you please just extract records now so that we see which number is associated with that IMEI, right? Because each phone has a serial number or something. And all of this information is logged by your mobile service providers, by the way. If you didn't know that, in fact, even the things that you browse on the internet, they know, right? But anyway, so data mining can be powerful, and you want to be careful here. You don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now. Some of you are going to be very, very important people very, very soon. I always tell students this. Please remember me. But so you want to watch what you're doing. Now, so we always have to ask important questions here when we're dealing with data. Like, you know, should we do this, right? Not just can we do it, just because you can mine, you know, transactions about student records. Like I have access to SIS, right? Like right now, I can log into SIS. I can log into SIS and extract information on and about, what is this now? On and about any, I don't know if it's any student at UMS or something like that. I have access to SIS. Not any student, but most of the courses that I handle or something, right? Now, the thing here is that just because I can extract this information, and I can, just because I can extract these records from here, right? Boom. I can come here and I can say I want to get a class list or something, or records for the specific students. And just because I can do this does not mean I should do it, right? I should be cognizant of the fact that privacy is extremely important, especially when we're handling sensitive data here. Okay, but also other so interesting questions that you ask as part of ethical consideration here would be, you know, are we using sensitive data appropriately? Yes, we are. Why? In our case here, yes, we are. How do we know? Well, we have anonymized the data, and as much as we are sharing this data, we've anonymized the student IDs, even the names actually, right? So with this anonymized, it becomes incredibly difficult for people to put the different pieces of the puzzle together and figure out who this student is. Elijah Temba Mahomani does not exist. In fact, I went through quite a bit of length here to make sure that this thing was anonymized. I went to Zambian Watchdog, I remember, and I was scrolling names from comments, people that were commenting on posts. And then I used those names, I got those names, came up with a unique list of names from the comments, and then I was replacing the actual student names with those fictitious names or something. The idea is I wanted to have Zambian names in the data set. But anyways, so you ask questions like, are we using the sensitive data appropriately? In terms of bias, important questions need to be asked. This is at model implementation phase or stage. Like, does our model unfairly penalize certain groups? Think of gender, for instance. You know, is it the case that the model performs in a very bizarre manner when you're feeding it observations that are associated with males, for instance? And questions to do with transparency. Can we explain the model's decision? Yes, we know we can go to Gemini and type in whatever text we have in here. But can we explain how this thing works when you key in your prompt here? The prompt, right? How do I find students that cheat in assessments or something? You know, do we know what's happening behind the scenes? You know what I'm trying to say? Explainability. So it's not enough for us to just view these things as black boxes, right? We need to be able to explain. In fact, by the way, there's this broader field, if you're interested, explainable AI or something. Everybody's talking about this, you know, explainable AI, you know, so methods and techniques that allow humans to understand, interpret, and trust decisions made by AI systems. Anyway, so these ethical principles, it turns out, are gradually being formalized into law. Now, in Zambia, you know, we don't really have like an explicit piece of legislation, for instance, that is tied to things to do with AI and machine learning or something, but we do have legislation that speaks to how data should be protected, more broadly speaking. Now, herein is the reason why I asked you to read up on that 30-page piece of legislation. Very interesting. I promise you that thing will come back and haunt you wherever you're going. Especially if you're going to find yourself building software, for instance, you will find people discussing that. Your clients and your customers. It will pop up when you're identifying NFRs, right? Non-functional requirements, if you remember. It's crazy right there. But anyway, so in Zambia, we see that the primary legal framework, that speaks to ethical consideration as it relates to data is the Data Protection Act, right, of 2021. Publicly available piece of legislation whose purpose is to provide effective mechanisms for how personal data is a thing here, right? For how personal data should be used and protected. Okay? And also to regulate the collection, use, transmission, and storage of personal data. To provide for the rights of data subjects. So people like you, there are people that are collecting data about you. The banks have information about you. UNZA has information about you. I have information about you, right? I was collecting data right now, and I'm going to be using this data. I'll think of the smart data set here, CSC for 792 data set for next year, right? So it's like the legislation provides for your rights, right? When data about you is being collected, for instance. But anyway, so you are the data subject in this particular case. Now, this act ideally governs the work we do as people that work with data. I'm referring to you guys that are being taught how to mine data in this particular case. Now, I thought the discussion of this piece of legislation was going to be interesting if you speak to some of the key aspects of the document. We're not going to sit here and start singing song about what is in the document. We've read that document. But what you notice is that there's some important key definitions that are related to what we're discussing here. Like for instance, they define in section 2 here what they mean by personal data, right? Personal data is data that can directly or indirectly identify a natural person. So anything that we can string together and possibly use to identify who you are is what they're calling personal data. Sometimes people will misrepresent personal data. They'll think it's data that has an NRC or something like that, right? It turns out that if you have enough attributes, you can be able to identify somebody. It's like what they told you about keys in databases, right? I don't know if you remember that. Huh? I don't know. Anyway, sometimes your primary key can comprise of a number of attributes, not just one attribute, is what they told you. Okay? You're stringing things together so that you uniquely identify somebody or something like that. And then there's also mention of so-called sensitive data. So there's personal data. This is like data that can directly or indirectly identify a natural person. So, example, it would be like your name, date of birth, your student ID, for instance, right? Now, I'm saying here, even if it's hashed, because when you play around with data, you could be able to identify somebody here. Anyway, and then there's a definition of what sensitive data, personal data is. This is data, by its nature we're saying the data by its nature can be used to suppress fundamental rights, right? And so requires stricter protection. We're calling that sensitive data, right? So pieces of information that have the potential to suppress fundamental rights. Like for instance, because Lighton is okay, I don't want to start the tribal wars here, right? But I'm going to use this because everybody talks about this tribe here, tribe there, tribe that, tribe this. It's like if they discover that Lighton is chair or something, then they're going to make a decision based on that, right? So what do? You don't disclose your tribe or something. And you know that more progressive countries, I don't know if you filled out forms here. It would be optional for you to decide on whether you are a black person or Caucasian or something. The thinking behind that is if people know that you are maybe a person of color like you and me, then they may make a decision that would be fundamentally different if you were not a person of color, right? Or something like that. So we are calling sensitive data, we're giving examples of sensitive data, things like race, ethnic origin, I'm from the western part of the country or northern part of the country here. Political opinion. He's PF or he's UPND or something like that. Oh, look at that, right? He's Muslim when the majority of us are Christian or something like that. Those are all pieces of data, right, that could potentially suppress the fundamental rights of human beings. So we're calling that sensitive data, right? I don't know, I was thinking of an example. I figured an example in our data set would be the sponsor tag here. Maybe Lighton would come here and say, he may disadvantage you because he realizes you are related, right, to a member of staff. Or maybe not actually, it's not just about disadvantaging you, right? Favoring you because Lighton knows that because you have a tuition waiver, you are related to a member of staff, probably your father or your mother, a lecturer at UNS or something like that, right? So this is sensitive data. And we are saying here that this sort of data should be handled with care. Very, very soon, I don't know if you've heard about what's happening. I don't know which course you did, maybe databases or advanced databases, but you know that Zambia is working towards a national database or something, right? Electronic database. I don't know what they're calling this. I used to teach a social protection course, you know, but this year I was so overwhelmed. I was teaching it. It's a postgraduate course, and I picked up quite a bit on this, right? So they're going to be collecting biometric data on and about us now. It's not enough for you to for them to just get a mugshot of you and give you an NRC, right? It's going to be biometric based. But anyway, so there's that. Now, the other parts of the legislation, the Data Protection Act of 2021 that are important here can be found in parts 2, 5, and 6. They speak to the laws and regulations, right? Entities that are mentioned as being associated with laws and regulations here, things like the data controller, right? So they define a data controller as any entity that determines why and how, the why and how of data processing. Banks, mobile service providers like Airtel, right? NAPSA, the University of Zambia, they're called data controllers. In other words, you can view these as being the owners of the data or something. And then the data processors would be the entities that process data on behalf of the controller. So in our case, you guys could be considered data processors, right? Because you have access to the data and you're doing all sorts of fancy things, you know? So data controller and data processor. And then there's mention of a data subject. We already, introduced this. This is an entity or an individual whose personal data is being processed. In our case, the student at risk of failing data set, it will be the students themselves, because they are personal identifying information in our data set. And then there's an important entity, right? And a lot of people don't know about this. Then again, in this country of ours, I don't know, sometimes we are good at setting up offices and all those things, but implementation is a problem. There's a so-called Data Protection Commissioner. This is an office. Okay, Data Protection Commissioner is a person, it's a position, right? But there's an office actually. And I'll showcase, I think I have the link here. There's an office of the data commissioner, which is supposed to be responsible for overseeing legislation and the regulation as it relates to data. Believe it or not, it's there. So if you just go to dataprotection.gov.zm, you'll find a wealth of information on that website. Now, I'll ask you to just, when you have a bit of time here, just go there and see what is there. And maybe by the time we get to September, mid-September, you'll be able to tell us a thing or two about what is lacking on that website. Anyways, so the Data Protection Commissioner is an office that is responsible for regulating and enforcing the act. Now, what you notice in this act, by the way, there's some interesting things. I always like giving this example here. You know that in the Data Protection Act of 2021, there's a clause that prevents data controllers and data processors from storing or processing data on servers that are hosted outside the boundaries of the Republic of Zambia. Is there, right? So it's this entity called the Data Protection Commissioner is the one which is responsible for enforcing that. It's there, I promise you. It's now I don't know if you read that piece of document here, but there's mention of you guys. I know you don't read, but I'm gonna if you don't read here, life becomes hard for you. Like today, I started marking this, right? I'm seeing 1, 0. I'm like, these kids, they're 4th years, they're supposed to be smarter, but they're not serious here, right? They're not they're not serious, they're not reading here, which is quite sad, really. But I can't find. I'll find it anyway. I'm sure it's quite sad, really. But anyway, so there's a clause in there, right? So the idea behind that clause, by the way, and I think we speak to it at some point. The idea behind that clause is, by the way, you can probably make money here as a consultant, right? You go to the data protection commissioner here and tell them, I can help you hunt down the people that are doing illegal things. You go and report. You go and report that UNZA is using Astria, and Astria stores student information, and it's hosted on Amazon Web Services. It was there, by the way. This is the reason why UNZA moved away from Astria. I think it's been a year or so, right? Very expensive also. It was for the UNZA. But anyway, so the Data Protection Commission is responsible for regulating and enforcing the Act. And also, it turns out that these entities we've defined as data controllers and data processors are required to register with this office. So in other words, UNZA, I don't know if they have, UNZA is supposed to have registered with the Data Protection Commission. The banks, the MNOs, are supposed to have registered by with this office or something, this office here. I don't know to what extent they've started enforcement of legislation is a bit of a problem in this country of ours. You know that there's a piece of legislation that prevents you and me from putting on our headsets, yeah, when we are crossing the road. It's a crime. It's illegal. You're not supposed to be doing that. Just like we have legislation, right? That states that you're supposed to do something like that. I don't know, Isaac, if you can mute your microphone, we'd really, really appreciate it, right? I don't know what's happening here, but I think Isaac is one of those people who, I've seen some of you, you log in and you're doing something else. You know how this thing automatically records? You log in and you're doing something else. Sometimes I have to log back in after hours and I have to end the recording and close it. People are still online 2 hours after the class, right? Which I guess they are just here to get marks, right? 0.083%. But anyway, so the controllers and processors must register with the data protection commissioner. Now, crucial in this piece of legislation, by the way, and I hope you found this interesting as well, are these 7 core principles, right? In fact, these principles are at the heart of the Act itself. And they explicitly state that personal data must be processed lawfully, fairly, and transparently, apparently. There should be like a limitation to the purpose, right? It's like you collect data for explicit and legitimate purpose only. I'll give an example of UNZA, right? You know that I was at UNZA between 2003 and 2006, right? Now, UNZA still has my records, they're there. But guess what? What is it? 50 years from now, I'll be dead, right? I won't be around. Or unless I'll just put it at 60 in case I reach my 90s here. But 60 years from now, I'll be dead, I won't be around. There's no reason why UNZA should keep that data. You understand? Purpose. The banks, I don't know if you've seen this. Most of the banks, if you want to generate your statement, they'll say you can only generate your statement for the last 6 months or something, right? There's a limit. In fact, in electronic records management, it's called a retention period. There's supposed to be a retention period associated with medical records, financial records, for instance, right? Or records that are captured by telecommunications companies or something like that. So purpose limitation. In other words, this is just code word for retention, right? Data retention here. And then also there's reference of another principle is data minimization, right? In other words, a collection of data should be limited to what is necessary. Here's the thing. UNZA is collecting data about you, right? But they shouldn't collect data like, what do you call this? What is, it's like how tall are you? You know, you understand what I'm saying? How much do you weigh? Why would they want to collect that data, for instance? You understand? So data minimization. Anyway, just like the MNOs, I don't know who managed to convince, or how they convinced people that they should create know your client databases, right? KYC. You know how now when you go there, although I guess maybe it's the government or something, when you go and register a SIM card, they say we'll take your photo, we want to see your NRC. It was there. I say, if you don't do that, we're going to disconnect you from the network, right? I don't know. Is that really necessary? I don't know. In the name of KYC, is it apparently, or in the name of security, according to the government, apparently. Now, I don't want to have this discussion myself. At least, a large class like yours, maybe there are people representing the government here. But I'm teaching, though, also. I'm sure they're there. Now, there's also a principle tied to accuracy, right? So data must be kept accurate and up to date to prevent misinformation. This is obvious here, right? There's also a principle tied to storage limitation. Now, this storage limitation, I want to argue here. Okay, this is like purpose limitation is what I misrepresented as retention, right? So this is you're collecting data for an explicit and legitimate purpose, but the storage limitation is what I was speaking to when I was talking about retention periods or something, right? You're not supposed to keep data in perpetuity, but you know that there's certain data that perhaps in the interest of future generations should be kept in perpetuity, like our records, right? Our health records. I'm sure human beings 200 years from now, 500 years from now, when all of us are no longer around, we'll find our health records useful, right? Maybe to find cures for these really disease burdens, right? Like these cancers or something like that. So I guess in that particular case, it could be an exception to this retention period or something, so that people are able to do research and all those things. Anyway, we see also that the other principle is data should be processed in accordance with the rights of the data subjects. You have rights, right? I have rights myself, So whatever processing is taking place is taking into account the rights of the subject. And then, of course, there's this principle tied to integrity and confidentiality, right? When we're processing data like this, it must be processed securely. You don't want to store it on servers that can easily be hacked, for instance, right? In other words, you must protect the data. And you know that in research, this has become a very, very important field. So there's what they call research. You should look it up. It's quite interesting. Research data management, they call it, right? So this notion that when you're conducting research and you're collecting data, you must take into account how exactly you're going to securely store that data. By the way, I like showcasing some of the things. I was working on a research data management project with JCTR. We created a repository.jctr.org.zm. We also repository.jctr. I don't know why it's dead here. jctr.org, jctr.org repository. I don't know if it's dead or something. It's here though. Somebody needs to wake it up. I guess it's dead. But we also created an RDM, I guess. I haven't touched this in a long time as well, but RDM, not there. We created, it was a very fun project. It wasn't as difficult. It was a fun project we worked on, but we're working on research data management for JCTR because JCTR attracts funding from a number of international entities. And these international entities increasingly require that you adhere to principles associated with data management, right? And stuff like that. And so for them to continue receiving money, these guys needed to set up this sort of infrastructure or something. Oh, there's training here. This sort of infrastructure. And so what we did, it's been years. It's been 2 years now since we looked at this. We created some infrastructure, right? research data management administration, RDM. Oh, so it's the DAMS platform, the digital asset management platform. DAMS is what it's supposed to be. So it's supposed to be dams.jctr.org.zm. I worked with this with Nason. Looks like the server is down for JCTR. Anyway, it's a server thing. I'll have to reach out to Nason. But integrity and confidentiality, very important, right? By the way, JCTR is an entity that prepares that controversial BNNB. It used to be called the BNB, right? Basic Needs Basket, but now it's the Basic Needs and Nutrition Basket. Every month we see the Zambian watchdog say JCTR claims that the cost of living for a family of 5 in Lusaka is now at 10,500 or something like that. They go around collecting data, right, to come up with those reports here. Now, something else that's interesting in this piece of legislation is a part that speaks to, it speaks about the duties of the controller and the processor. Remember we said that the controller is the entity that determines the why and how data processing is supposed to be done, and then the processor is the entity that processes the data. So there are duties associated with these entities, right? There's certain expectations. Like for instance, in section 47 here, there's a security of processing clause here where there's mentioned that we must implement appropriate technical measures to protect data. Yeah. So this is the responsibility of the controller and the processor, right? You are implementing appropriate technical measures to protect the data that you have access to. UNZA must have implemented technical measures that ensures that the data they are collecting, they've been collecting data since the 60s here, is secure, or it's protected. It could be that you are, you've done computer security here, those things that you discussed anyway. Also, they state that you must notify the appropriate entities. In this particular case, you're notifying who? This entity, is it? The Office of the Data Commissioner, Data Protection Commissioner, suppose it is. You're notifying them of any security breach. So if data is breached, the commissioner must be notified within 24 hours, apparently. I don't know who does this. Remember there was this scandal recently. I don't know if you can call it a scandal. Apparently NAPSA was hacked or something like that. That's a classic data breach. Hopefully NAPSA reported to the Data Protection Commissioner within 24 hours. But it was all over the news, I guess. And then there's mention of data retention. We must not keep personal data for longer than necessary for specific purpose for which it was collected. Now, usually different domains will have what do you call this? Different retention periods, if that makes sense. I don't know if it's making sense here. I'm going to pause for a little while here. Hope this is making sense here. And then there's mention in part number 9 here. Just a minute, by the way. Apologies. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. So there's part number 9, which speaks to the rights of the data subject, right? So this entity for whom, not the entity for whom, but I hope you can still hear me here. I don't know why my microphone is not working. I prefer my external microphone, but sometimes it doesn't work, which is very strange here, but that's okay. So there's rights of the data subject, right? So individuals in data sets that we work with have legally protected rights, right? So right of access. So they have the right to know if their data is being processed or get a copy of it. So if you want today, now I know most of you probably don't care, right? You can go to Airtel and request to have access to data on and about you. So if you're just curious as to what sort of data Airtel is capturing when you're browsing on the internet, everybody browses here. You go there, you notice that they actually are capturing, they capture URLs, by the way. I always tell this. My baby brother was very, very worried at some point when I told him, you know that we can access, when I was working for Airtel then, you know that they know which websites you visit. And he was there, worried. And I was thinking to myself, what websites is this guy visiting? But that's okay. And then the right to rectification, right? So if you notice that the data about you that is inaccurate here, you have the right, to have that data corrected. So nobody should give you a hard time here if you realize that there's information that has been captured by Airtel that is wrong. You can go to Airtel. You know how sometimes you can look up information about yourself, like you look at what people see when they're about to send money to you, for instance. If there's a mistake in terms of your name, for instance, you can reach out to Airtel, right, and have that information rectified or something. I thought this one was interesting, the right to erasure, right? You know how sometimes if you're a very scandalous person, for instance, there'll be information about you on the internet or something. That data is, I guess, it's a website in Zambia. You have the right, to be forgotten, in other words, right? To have your data deleted under certain conditions. You know that on the internet, there are many such things, right? You know that there are certain companies that are in the business of, and they have advertised a lot on YouTube or something. Most of these YouTubers will advertise, right? They'll advertise services to say, if you want certain information about you, when you Google yourself, I don't know about you, but when I Google myself, I don't care. I'm not a scandalous person myself. When I Google myself, it's all good information on about me, nothing bad so far, you know. So, but if I found something, right, maybe recorded on the Zambian watchdog or something, I have the right, to be forgotten or something like that. Anyway, right of objection, right? So the right to object to the processing of personal data. So if you want, under certain conditions, I guess, you can maybe go to your insurance company. They're big on that. They sell data, I think. You know how sometimes you'll be surprised. Why am I receiving this funny message from this company? These people sell data, is it? You know, so you've subscribed to some insurance package somewhere, and at some point they start sharing that information with other people without your permission or something. But anyway, there are exemptions and transfers. You find these in section 7 and 10, right? The Act provides for exemptions from some certain principles for specific purposes, like, for instance, research, what we do, archiving, and statistical purposes. You know, and this is why I mentioned here that this is the legal basis for our course project. This is why we can do what we're doing here. It allows us, right? This exemption allows us to process data, but it doesn't exempt us from the core principles of security, accuracy, and storage limitation, of course. And this is my personal favorite here, right? Cross-border transfer. Personal data must be processed and stored on servers in Zambia. This is a big one. You know, you guys should be positioning yourselves strategically here. Seeing as everybody now is dealing in data, data has become very, I guess, well sought after currency in Zambia now with the rise of the machines. So you want to position yourself strategically. Very, very soon, a lot of people want to start implementing these AI solutions and services. And when that happens, data becomes important. When that's the case, people have to figure out, where are we going to store data, right? You can position yourself strategically, and you start going, telling people, listen, do you know about this clause here in the Data Protection Act of 2021? Before you are visited by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, we can help you. We can, this is you now, and you should be doing this, right? Because you're graduating very soon. We can help you set up, we can help you set up your data. We'll migrate from Amazon Web Services, and we'll place your data. We'll migrate it to Infratel servers because they use Azure or something. Or we'll go to Xamarin, and we can use their cloud compute platform or something. I don't know. It's up to you. Anyway, so this is an important thing here. We find it in clause number 70 here. It turns out transferring data outside the Republic of Zambia is strictly regulated. Now, remember, policy and implementation are two different things in this country of ours. There are conditions, though. You notice that you can do this if subjects consent or if there's approval from the commissioner. Typically, it's the minister's got to approve. Okay. Anyway, something else that's interesting in the legislation, offenses and penalties. If you abrogate any of the 12 principles, right, of data processing, the maximum fine, I thought it was strange here, it's 40 million kwacha, or 2% of your annual turnover here. You see how you can make money, you guys, before you even graduate. You can position yourself strategically here. You're going around. The number of, most of the companies we have around, especially SMEs, oh, we store our data on Google Drive. What? Google Drive is not, I mean, those servers are not, they're outside the boundaries of Zambia. You know, failure to register as a data controller or processor will result in 200,000 kwacha or up to 5 years imprisonment. I don't know about that here. You're a data processor here, be careful, right? Unlawful disclosure of personal data, right? This is Lighton. He has access to student records and he starts going around and is sharing data about the CSC for 792 students. Huh? I can be fined 80,000 here. I don't know if I'll be 80,000 or 2 years imprisonment. And there's unlawful disclosure of sensitive personal data. You notice that the fine is the same here. You remember the definition of personal data and sensitive personal data? Yeah. I thought it was a good enough introduction. I want to say something here. Sometimes you know the syllabus says A, sometimes we do B, right? You notice that the syllabus tells us that we're supposed to apparently, I think this thing was arrived at before the Data Protection Act of 2021, right? There was mention, oh, this, we should do this. And I was like, no, right? We can't be discussing legislation for the European Union when we have our own legislation. So in case you're wondering, the reason why I decided that we discuss the Zambia Data Protection Act as opposed to the General Data Protection Act regulation is because this piece of legislation is tied to the European Union. Okay? But as homework, I do encourage you to find time and read up on the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and hopefully, knows, maybe we can have conversations about this at some point or something like that. I'm going to pause here and ask if there are questions. The next time we meet, we are going to start our in-depth discussion of data processing and transformation. It's mostly going to be hands-on, technical stuff where I will introduce you to these packages that I've kind of like already introduced you to them, but we'll go through them step by step, see how we install them and configure them, like scikit-learn, for instance, NLTK, Spacey, these are natural language processing libraries, for instance, Jensen, right? I don't know. I always like it when, especially that we're handling text here, I always like it to discuss a number of these popular NLTK libraries, right? Usually when you're getting started, there's almost always mention of NLTK, but there's more here. You can look at Spacey. I've worked with students who've used Spacey in the past. Okay, I want to ask, are there any questions? If there are no questions, day after tomorrow we have, we already had 3 hours of class this week. What does that mean? Yeah, well, but you see the thing, right? They should be teaching us finance. You know how they say you should save for a rainy day. You guys had a lot of free time in the first 4 weeks or something because we're not having class, right? In CSC 4792. So now we are having class here. So which is why we're having class on Saturday. Right? Does that mean we are having class on Saturday, Dennis? Thank you. For the biometric data, when will this be implemented? And I think there's a timeline. I'm in touch with people from people that are in charge of social protection here. Before I go, I have a class, but if you're interested, right? I might show you this here. Invitation from me. MSP 5012. seminar or something. I don't know if I'll be able to find this. I know there's Eric. I know there's I know there was a presentation and I have slides here, right? I've even forgotten people are supposed to be working. I feel bad. But I'll share this. But you can also look it up. They're in the process of, I don't know when they're launching. They've probably reached an advanced stage now. I've forgotten when. But if I remember, I will share, I will email. And somebody was, Miss Inala, I'll email. Somebody was complaining there. Why are we, you're sending a lot of emails? A lot of emails? How? You guys maybe are used to communicating on WhatsApp, I think. That's why, right? But that's okay. Good night. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. I'll see you tomorrow. We have class tomorrow, actually, by the way. Tomorrow we have class at 12 tomorrow, according to my calendar. Anyway, there's a hand up. Okay, no hand up. All right, thanks. Good night.